and welcome to the program. Today we're talking about ethics. They're something we don't think about from day to day, but they affect our decisions in every aspect of life, whether it's the home, in education, in politics, or in business and work. As Ukraine seeks to comply further with Western values and standards, ethics is key. To address this, we're joined by David Schmidt, business ethics professor and director of the Center for Applied Ethics at Fairfield University, Connecticut. He's also currently involved in the Academic Integrity Project in Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So, depending on the kind of country that you live in, ethics tend to vary. For example, in the EU and North America, we have very similar codes of conduct, basically. And in Ukraine, they're more vague and kind of open to interpretation, some might say.
I see.
So how does your company find a balance between trying to implement Western standards of ethics in Ukraine?
I don't know it's so much that we want to impose standards. I was brought to this project in Ukraine to share the kinds of things we were working on and are working on academic integrity at our schools in the United States. But I see it more as a mutual learning between us and our Ukraine partners, sharing best practices. So that's different from me coming in and saying, here's how you're going to do it. It's more me saying, well, here's how we do it. What are your experiences? And from that, we get a dialogue.
So how do you talk to companies or individuals or government bodies, even maybe, to make them understand the benefits of having one system and having one set of standards in terms of ethics?
My experience has been you always start by asking questions. So I would go to a company or to a school or wherever I'm going, I would start by saying, what are your concerns? What are you trying to address? Where do you want to be a year from now? And then when I hear that, then I have a good idea for where we can start talking about making improvements, making some suggestions.
And what are some of the responses that you tend to get?
Well, in business, I find, for example, if I'm brought in to talk about ethics, what they really want to talk about is compliance. And there's a difference there. Something similar goes on in education. But let's stay with business just for a minute. All businesses worry about scandals. Scandals hurt your image. Finally, it hurts your bottom line. So they want to avoid scandals. And so when they say, let's have ethics, what they're really saying is, we want to stay out of trouble. So my response is, first of all, to say, good. It's good to stay out of trouble.
Right,
but that's not going to really get you where you want to be. Where you want to be is the kind of company that people want to do business with. Or if you're a school, that you want to be the kind of institution that will draw the best students, the best faculty. You don't get that simply by staying out of trouble. You also have to be really good at something. And that opens the door for talking about positive values, ethics in a positive way.
Right. So what does that mean in practice?
Well, it would mean in practice, for example, let me start again with business, because that's where I do a lot of my work. Right, that's where you
specialize, that's right.
In business, it would mean we don't just have lawyers telling us what we shouldn't do. Instead, we want to have people identify what would be the positive practices, what are the values that support that practice, and here's the key part. Can we get everybody to take ownership of the values that we say are important? Every company has a code of ethics. And usually you can put it as a slogan on your coffee mug.
Yeah.
But what is harder to achieve is for people to say, if we say we want to, first of all, have integrity, or we want to have transparency in what we do, we have to say, well, what does that mean for you and your job? We have to operationalize it. We have to make it real in terms of a person's actual job requirements. So that's the challenge, to take those vague or broad values, honesty, transparency, integrity, and say, what would that mean to you in your job? And the best way to do that I know, is to talk about specific cases, get down to actual examples. That's why so much of the time when we talk about ethics in business or in schools, we're working with case studies.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you get a lot of case studies where corruption is one of the key obstacles, key problems?
If I understand what you're asking, what we find often is you have to deal with unequal power. So you may have someone who's in a position of power who is keeping people from doing their jobs the way they should be doing. Very often what you find is most people want to be successful, but they also want to do their job the right way. But there can be people, and sometimes in positions of power, who block that because what they want is to have it their way, to cut corners, to take bribes, whatever it might be.
So is it most of the time, is it just one person or a set of individuals in power that are responsible?
Well, that's a good question. It really depends on the situation, but you're getting at something very important. It all starts with the person at the top. And if that person is not setting the tone, if that person is not leading by example, you can have a lot of effort all through the organization, and it won't matter. Generally speaking, you really have to start with the person at the top who says, we stand for these values. I want everyone to put these into effect in their workplace. There will be consequences if you don't, but there also will be rewards if you do. If people don't see that, whether it's education or business or government, if they don't see the leader stepping up, you have a much harder problem. So
what would be the three key sets of values that you would say or you would recommend a business should have?
Okay. You start with the bottom line. First of all, don't do harm. We have to start there or go home, right? But we don't end there. I would say we then talk about what are the kinds of things that, in a sense, we are required to do, that we think are important, good things. But then at the highest level, we would say, what are the things that no one's requiring me to do, but I think it's what I should do? There is a test for ethics sometimes. People would say, are you ethical? Well, how do you act when no one's watching you? How do you act when it's really just you that you're being accountable to? That's the highest level of ethics.
So that's kind of a mindset that a person should have or should, be brought up with.
Yeah, I think so. Well, yeah, and upbringing obviously is very important. I teach university level students. I know I'm not going to change their values at this stage of the game. I don't think that's my job. Their upbringing is important. So I'm luckily, most of my students, I think, really already have a good set of values. Their questions are, when I'm faced with a gray issue at work, when I'm faced with a situation that requires a judgment call, and people are looking at me to make the judgment, will I have the skills, will I have the tools to make a judgment call that I can really stand up and defend? Dealing with those gray areas is where we, I think, see if people have really learned ethics at a high level.
Right. So when nobody's around to see the so-called bribe or see the person in power taking advantage of their own position. Now, what do young people usually come to you for advice, for help, or perhaps even situations that they've been in personally that they seek to perhaps avoid next time or to solve in a better way?
Let me tell you something that really does trouble me. First of all, I think the generation of students that I see coming through school now, and what I'm about to tell you is not just my observation, but it's supported by research. The younger generation tends to be a little more idealistic.
But that's for every country.
Yes, I'm speaking broadly here. But what they're worried about, they're idealistic, but there's also a level of cynicism. Many of our students, because they don't have much experience yet, or they've seen their mom and dad get beat up in corporate America, they develop a cynical attitude. It's not really grounded in anything specific, but they sort of feel like, to succeed, you got to be tough. You got to get that person before they get you. So one thing I worry about as an educator is I want to nurture that idealism, but I also need to get them ready for the challenges they're really going to face. I don't want them to be cynical. So I try to be realistic with some hope.
Right. Now, coming back to Ukraine, you've probably heard the stories and the experiences from businessmen, as yourself specialize in business ethics. A lot of them refuse to do business in Ukraine because of either bureaucracy, rumors of corruption, or the company itself has experienced some form of it, and as well as problems with copyright law. Ukraine has plenty of instances where this was a problem. So how reasonable is the government in setting the standard for when it comes to penalties to protect intellectual property?
Right.
And this is a very I think this is a very important question, because any type of business who wants to do, businessman who wants to do business in Ukraine wants to know that they're being protected and their product is being protected.
That's right. So we're talking about this from, I would say, from the perspective of Ukraine. Okay, I think Ukraine has a powerful economic incentive to introduce the kinds of reforms that will attract business. You want more business? You have to provide a level playing field with some agreed upon rules. That's the job of government. That's also true in the United States. We don't want a whole lot of government in the United States. Most people in business would like to have less government regulation, not more. But every business person knows you have to have a level playing field or someone's going to take advantage of it. So the job for government is to say, here's the level playing field. Here, we're all going to compete. We're going to compete like crazy. Let the best person win, but we want it to be reasonably fair. So Ukraine has, in my judgment, a powerful incentive to convince people that the field is relatively level. Think of sports. You wouldn't go to somebody's stadium and compete if you knew that there are all kinds of booby traps or things hidden in the field to keep you from playing well. You want to have a field that's the same for everybody. Once that happens, then business will step in. I believe business will step in and eagerly set up the kinds of deals that will make everyone better off.
So how enforceable is that really in reality?
How enforceable is what?
Well,
having rules?
Well, if the government sets a level playing field for all of the companies, and it can't keep track of every single company, of every single deal, it's very difficult.
Right.
So measures are set in place, but how effective are they really?
I think that depends on a case by case. If you're looking at intellectual property, for example, you would want to have basic rules for example, patents or copyrights. You want to have a mechanism in place so if a person has a really cool idea, they can say, my idea is protected, and the government will back that up. You're right. The government cannot enforce every single transaction. You can't watch every single thing that goes on. That's where ethics becomes important. So if I'm going to do business with you or someone else, and I know that I can trust you with my ideas, I don't know if I can trust that person with my ideas, I'll do my business with you. So at the micro level, on individual transactions, the ethics become very important. But I'm not even going to be here in the first place talking to you if I feel that the game is rigged. If I feel that the game overall is rigged against me, I'll go somewhere else in the world.
Right, so that's where the level playing field comes into effect.
And I think that's where the government really does have a necessary role. But the government is not going to make everybody ethical. As you just pointed out, the government cannot track everything. And there's one more thing you haven't brought up. There are also loopholes to every rule. And that's why, for example, in the United States, we do not have a statutory definition for insider trading. Right. Nobody knows exactly where the line is on insider trading when you're just trading and when you've gone over the line. And the government wants it that way. The SEC wants it that way because if you're not sure where the line is, you'll be kind of conservative. You won't get too close to it. The government can't.
But you have different cases though for insider trading. There's been plenty of scandal in the media.
Yes, there has, and what we have then in the courts, the judges make decisions on a case-by-case basis.
Again, yeah.
And then that's what we use for guidance. We say how much are we like previous cases, but there's no one statute that just nails it down. And
should Ukraine take the same approach? Should the Ukrainian government take kind of the American approach of keeping everybody, hesitant of approaching the line and being very conservative about it?
That might be worth looking at to see if that would work in Ukraine. Again,
do you think it will work in your experience?
You have to remember, now right now I'm on my 4th visit to your country,
Right.
and so I'm a young student when it comes to learning about what is going on in Ukraine, what the history has been, what the culture is, what the current circumstances are. So I don't want to be the first person to say, here's what Ukraine should do. I would say, in any situation, we do better if there's transparency, if there's a clear understanding of what the rules are. Ukraine has to decide what rules make sense for Ukraine. I'm not going to try to say that, but I do believe there are clear rules, there's transparency, people feel that the game is fair. Usually, everyone's better off.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. We'll be watching your work, and I'm sure you'll get to know more about the kind of climate here in Ukraine. And yeah, we'll be looking forward to that. Thanks so much.
I can't wait to come back.
Okay. So that was David Schmidt, business ethics professor and director of the Center for Applied Ethics at Fairfield University. Thank you. You're watching UATV.